Our special guest today is Caroline Hickman. Caroline has a background in mental health social work and community mental health projects. She's an integrative psychosynthesis psychotherapist and a lecturer at the University of Bath, researching children and young people's emotional responses to climate change in the United Kingdom, Brazil, the Maldives, Nigeria, and the United States for 10 years. Her work examines their eco-anxiety and distress, eco-empathy, trauma, moral injury, and the impact of climate anxiety on relationships. She is co-lead author on a 2021 quantitative global study into 10,000 children and young people's emotions and thoughts about climate change, published in The Lancet Planetary Health. A practicing psychotherapist and a member of the Climate Psychology Alliance, Caroline Hickman has been developing a range of therapeutic approaches to ecological distress, including psychological assessment model for eco-anxiety. And she has delivered workshops in climate psychology, emotional resilience, and mental health internationally. Caroline Hickman, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Thanks, Chris. It's always so embarrassing listening to that sort of list, but you did it very well. Thank you for doing it fast.
We practice over here. We try and give credit where credit is due. So thank you for your very important work. And let's dive right into it. You're an integrative psychosynthesis psychotherapist.
Yeah.
I've been practicing that for 3 days and I still can't say it.
Yeah, it's designed to torture you.
That is a mouthful.
Yeah.
It's working so far. What is that?
What does it mean?
Is your approach to psychology different from what most people expect from a psychologist?
Not different from most people, but it is a particular form of depth psychology, which includes looking at the unconscious. So that's one of the most important things. So if you've ever seen the Pixar film Inside Out, you'll know about the scale of the unconscious and how joy cannot thrive without sadness. So adept psychology, integrative psychosynthesis, psychotherapy, even I can't say it, talks about the importance of not just what is in our conscious awareness, but what's under the surface, what's hidden, what's out of sight. It also includes a kind of psycho-spiritual, soulful approach to things. So it doesn't limit the idea of the human being to just daily living. It says we have a higher purpose. We have things that we aspire to. It doesn't have to be religious, but things that inspire us, things that we get creative around. It can be about art. It can be about relationship with the natural world. All sorts of things that inspire us in different ways. It certainly doesn't want to pathologize people. And what I mean by that is our feelings of depression or anxiety or mental health struggles in life. The first thing we would want to look at is what does it mean to you as an individual, rather than how can we get rid of the symptoms? Because if we try and get rid of the symptoms, what happens is they generally pop up again somewhere else in a different form. So we're going to want to look at what does it mean, what's under the surface, and how is this kind of nudging you in a different direction in life? It's often those turning points in life where people feel they've got an emotional, psychological crisis, where actually when your back is against the wall, you come out of that making massive changes for the better. So it takes that sort of approach. It's less negative. It's saying anxiety and depression is part of life. How can we make the most of this? How can we turn it into something better?
So here comes another one, for me anyway. You also practice analytical depth psychology psychotherapy.
Yeah.
Why are integrative psychosynthesis psychotherapy and analytical depth psychology psychotherapy sound approaches when working with children and young people traumatized by climate change?
Well, that's a great question. So if you spend any time with young children, you'll know they've got this extraordinary capacity for imagination. They can imagine things. One of my favorite stories is a friend of mine who came in from work not that long ago, and she went in to see her little boy, and he was talking to his toys and dinosaurs and dragons, and his mum said, "Oh, can I join you?" And he said, "Of course, and she went to sit down and went, "Not there. There's a dragon on the chair. Mummy, can't you see it?" She was about to sit on this dragon, which was very real to him because he was in relationship with that. So in children's lives, that imaginal relationship is still very much alive. And to that little boy, that dragon was absolutely there, even though no one else could see it. We see this in so many different ways. We have imaginary friends. We, play games with these things. And it's a really emotionally, mentally healthy thing to do. It's how we learn about relationships. So it's a wonderful approach to working with children, actually anyone of any age, that wants to play with difficult things and wants to use storytelling, use art, use the imaginal to help us think about how we feel and the way to approach things that are really hard to put into words. So when we apply that to things like climate change, it's absolutely perfect. Because climate change, we've got the science, we've got the facts, it's been in the public domain for decades. And yet we have these mysteries, don't we, Chris, where if we've got the facts, why haven't we acted? If we've got the knowledge, why haven't we done something? If we've got the solutions, why are we not using them? Now, of course, you can have a political, economic argument about why we've not done this, and those are perfectly legitimate. And yet you still got a mystery. We've got the solutions. Why have we not acted on this? And that brings us back to that kind of mystery of humanity and human nature. So you can go to philosophy, but you can also go to psychology. You can go to spirituality, go to art, creativity. We are fundamentally struggling to deal with some of these big existential questions in life, like the climate biodiversity crisis. And there's no question, we are struggling. We don't quite know how to navigate this, primarily because humanity's never faced anything like this before. So we've got no blueprint, we've got no map. And anytime we sort of think we know what to do, frankly, we're just kind of making it up a little bit, really. We've got some facts, we've got some things that will help us. We've also got lots of unknowns. There's a particular politician whose name I forget, who said, I think it was a US one, who said there are known unknowns and unknown unknowns, and, frankly, help us all. We are trying to find our way through some really complex challenges. And so we have to have a little bit of humility. Otherwise, there'll be a lot of hubris here. And if we just focus on practical, technological solutions, frankly, humans are incredibly skilled and adept at sabotage and messing up the best laid plans, right? What is that famous saying, humans make plans and the gods laugh at us, right? Or our wives laugh at us, or our pets laugh at us. I can't even control my little 3-year-old dog, let alone anything else, right? So when we're talking about these complex things like the climate crisis, we have to learn how to navigate it. Timothy Morton, who's an academic in the US, calls it hyperobject, which means it's too big to see, it's too big to understand, it's too big to see all in one go. So what that means is you can look at one part of it, like the plastic in the oceans, or heat domes, or wildfires, or rising sea levels, and say, okay, I'm going to worry about that. We'll do something about that. And then somebody helpfully comes along and says, yes, but what about air pollution? Yeah, okay, let's do that. And then somebody says, yeah, but what about this? And then your brain is melting, isn't it? So it's too big to see. It's too big to navigate. We don't have a map. We don't have a blueprint. I promise you there is some good news here, but we have to start with the difficult stuff. Otherwise, we don't know what we're dealing with. And if we don't know what we're dealing with, we're at risk of trying for simplified solutions, which aren't going to get us anywhere. So I take some comfort in saying, not in a passive way of it's all so difficult, but in a, we need to take this seriously, and we also need to give some time to learning about this so that we can fully understand it. And that brings us back to children and young people and First Nations people, indigenous populations, who often have different ways of seeing and understanding the world. They've not lost those imaginal narrative storytelling ways of seeing the world, which often get knocked out of us by rational technological thinking, which we think is superior and maybe often is what has got us into this mess in the first place. I don't do short answers. I am so sorry. I will try and be succinct. I will try.
You're fine. All it means is I've got a lot of content and you have to come back on the show. So I'm happy to do that at any time.
Okay.
So I've used this phrase a few times already. What is eco-anxiety and how does it differ from general anxiety?
Okay. And that's a perfect example of what I was just talking about, which is let's go back to basics and really understand what we're dealing with here. Because it's a huge mistake to think that eco-anxiety is just anxiety about climate change. We've missed the boat in calling it something better than eco-anxiety. It's out there in the world and everyone relates to it, understands it, claims it for their own, and good luck. I don't care what we call it. What I care about is that we understand it. Eco-anxiety is triggered by care and concern and anxiety about climate change and what's happening to the planet. Yes, but it doesn't stop there. That's the first bit. The second bit is then this dawning awareness that you're feeling anxious, but a lot of the people around you might not be. And so you look around yourself and you think, well, why aren't people running around? Why aren't people more scared? Why am I the only one? And then you raise it with people and they go, oh, stop worrying, or go back to school, or technology will save us, or carbon capture will save us. And that reassures you for an hour or a day or a week. And then the anxiety comes back. So the other half of eco-anxiety is this dawning awareness that the very people who've got the power to do something about it are often not acting on it as quickly as we would like them to do. And at the same time, they are often saying, well, we are taking action, without taking action as rapidly as is needed. And then we see the news reports and we see the wildfires and we see the flooding and we see the IPCC reports and we look at just the flooding in Central Europe right now, the wildfires in Canada right now and in the US. You think, hang on a minute, really? I mean, I can't tell you the number of people this week alone, and it's only Tuesday, who have said to me, I am so confused about seasons now. Is this autumn? Is this fall? Is this spring? Is this summer? What's happening? And then you see a butterfly and they shouldn't be around. Or it's so confusing. It's confusing for nature and it's confusing for us. So, everything's changing and there's subtle changes or huge changes with the floods and the wildfires. And we don't quite know what's real and what's not real and what we can trust and what we can't trust. And that creates eco-anxiety. So we don't know where we stand. And, we're little animal bodies, really. We may have developed minds and emotions, but our bodies are like, do I hibernate? Do I put the heating on? Do I wear a coat? What's going on? And that's reflected in the shifts and changes in the natural world around us. So we're confused, and that makes us insecure. That makes us anxious. There's one more thing to say about eco-anxiety, and then I'm going to shut up. And that is, it is a mentally healthy response to what's going on. We should be feeling uncertain and disrupted and dysregulated and scared because it's scary. And therefore, I would worry about anyone that didn't have some eco-anxiety. I don't want everyone to be so overwhelmed that they can't function. But I would really question people that said, no, it's not my problem. And the other thing to remind people of, which I think is really, really important, is you only feel eco-anxiety or distress or depression, because that's the other thing. It's not just anxiety. It's a whole range of emotions. But you only feel this because you care. You care about the planet. You care about your children's futures, your grandchildren's futures. So you should be proud that you care. we should be proud that people have got eco-anxiety. The last thing I want to do is take it away from people. I definitely want to support people in finding out how to live with it so that they're not overwhelmed or stuck or, you know, having to push it into the unconscious, because then it'll just come back and bite you, you know, when your back is turned. We don't want that. So we need to understand it, but we don't want to get rid of it. We don't want to pathologize it. We need to say, okay, you're here for good reason. I'm sort of half joking when I say the only cure for eco-anxiety in children and young people is to increase eco-anxiety in politicians or oil company executives, the adults with the power to do stuff. And there's some truth in that. It's kind of a joke, but it's not funny. It's, you know, the number of young people who say to me, I'd be all right with this if I could trust that the people around me with the power were doing what they needed to do to take care of our futures. And I think they're quite right to see it as a sense of relational hurt.
And we sometimes forget how intelligent and bright children are, or how they can be. And to see it through their eyes is a whole other world for us to realize and to come to grips with, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Oh, gosh, absolutely. I mean, there's two things there. One is a good parent, a good auntie, uncle, grandparent. Of course, we want our children to have happy childhoods and not be frightened by things. So it's a natural inclination to protect them from scary stuff, of course. But the climate crisis is actually turning that on its head. Actually, good parenting means now talking with your children about this in ways that they can understand so they don't feel alone with it. We want them to have happy childhoods, but that doesn't mean we can take away the fear of what's going on. Anyway, they're fully informed. They're online. They're learning about it all by themselves. Better that they learn about it with us.
You mentioned talking to your children about it. You recently had a conversation with one of my producers who's in his 60s, who was perhaps a bit perplexed about eco-anxiety among children and young people. He talked about his fear of heights and how that was an immediate and logical fear, but he hadn't yet grasped the climate-related generational fears of his son and grandson.
Yeah.
Would you talk about the different generational perspectives?
Absolutely. That was a really good conversation, wasn't it? It was a perfect illustration of this. So, you know, my generation, you know, let's say heading, you know, down the older age end of things, I grew up believing that the world had and I know not everybody gets this, security, but in an ideal world, let's just have an ideal world for a moment. We grow up believing that there is some security in our future, that we can work towards things being better for our future, that the planet will be okay. But actually, for younger generations today, it's completely different. And we need to wrap our heads around that and deal with our guilt and our shame and our bad feelings around that. So this 10-year-old said to me, he said, and this was a few years back, he said, Caroline, you don't get it. You don't get it at all. He said, you grew up thinking polar bears would be there forever. He said, I've grown up knowing they will go extinct. And he stopped me, and he was absolutely right. And I had to think, you're right. You know, what's it like to grow up with that knowledge of extinction and anticipate it and wait for it and feel helpless that there's very little you can do about it? Now, I can feel the grief and the sadness and the guilt of not being able to prevent it. But I had that childhood experience of believing those creatures, amazing creatures, would be there forever. That 10-year-old never had that. So how does he process that differently to how I process it? There's another nice story. A mother and daughter, teenage, came to a talk I gave a few years ago, and they'd argued on the way to the talk. I think it was one of those arguments you have with a teenager where you forget what you're arguing about, but you're still arguing, right? And we talked in the talk about this sort of thing and generational differences. And they emailed me the next day, because one of the things I said in the talk was, I think my generation should apologize to children and young people. We should say sorry. We've messed up. We've given you this. You're inheriting it. It's not a good inheritance. And we should say sorry, right? Okay, I have to keep my guilt and responsibility in perspective. I'm not ExxonMobil, so it's this big, not that big. But I am still culpable, and I have a responsibility and a duty of care there, and I should just say sorry. So I said this, and so they emailed me the next day, and the mum said, walking home, she said, I said sorry to my daughter. And it stopped the argument, which is good. And her daughter said, okay, all right. She said, what are you going to do about it? Which is great. I love that. And her mum said, well, what do you want me to do about it? She said, okay. She said, I want you to come into school tomorrow and tell my teachers that I've missed the deadline for changing the title of my extended project. Deadline's gone past, but we were at this talk and I now want to change my subject to climate change and teenagers. And I want you to come in the school and tell the teachers I've got to be allowed to do it. And her mum went, yeah, okay. And she did. And she came in and she said to the teachers, this is why. And the teachers went, yeah, okay. And so I love that story because it's a really nice illustration of how different generations can, by acknowledging that different responsibility, it doesn't actually cause a generational rift or problem. It can actually heal something between the different generations. We stand in different places, but we can have a shared understanding and responsibility. There's some interesting statistics which I've looked up, which I was guessing when we talked before about age differences, about anxiety and concern. And the highest level of concern is the under 30s. 61%, 60% under 34-year-olds. And then it drops in midlife. The 45 to 54-year-old group, only 44%. Okay, it's still reasonably high, but it's much lower, isn't it? But then it starts to go up again in the over 65s to 56 and 60%. So there's a curve here where the younger generation's much more concerned. Absolutely. Good reason. It's logical. It's their future. They're thinking about their futures, their careers, having children. You know, this is the world they're inheriting. And then maybe there's something about the older generations who have got more time, more space to look back, reflect, and have more distance, more process, and think, what have we done? What could we have done differently? It doesn't all have to be about regret, does it? Older age can also be about, well, what did I do well? And okay, all right, I'm not going to be a famous actor or, you know, rocket scientist, but I did this well or that well. You know, there's a whole kind of reckoning that can take place in older age. So that intergenerational difference doesn't have to always, I think, be a negative or a problem. That's important. And that illustration with your producer was brilliant because different things frighten different generations. And I know that, you know, we've got threats in the world today that we need to pay attention to. But, you know, the Cuban Missiles Crisis, for example, was very threatening for younger generations, you know, way back. But there's a big difference, and I really want to emphasize this difference between the anxiety about climate change and, for example, the anxiety about the Cuban Missiles Crisis, which is a relatable, world-threatening crisis. But there is one significant difference that I think people need to get their heads around, which is when it's something like nuclear war or the Cuban Missiles Crisis. I'm not minimizing it, I promise. It's devastating. But you can imagine, how do we sustain ourselves with hope? We imagine when we get over this, when we get beyond it, when we have peace, when the war has finished, we can get back to normal. We can have life again and hope and optimism. And that's what sustains us through wars, through threats, through crises. And people rebuild through the most awful crises. When it comes to the climate crisis, that rebuilding is not possible because we're halfway through the story of the climate crisis. We're not at the beginning of the story. So we can't undo these extinction events that are happening, but we can change the ending of the story. So it's not all doom and gloom devastation. But we have to recognize that we're halfway through, and we have to recognize that this is a worldwide planetary crisis in ways that maybe other crises haven't always been.
You've mentioned crises a few times there. We titled this episode, is it catastrophe or transformation?
Yeah.
And that's a phrase that you use.
Yeah.
What's the story behind that binary choice?
Yeah. So there's so many binaries when it comes to the climate crisis. We have the binary, which is familiar to a lot of folks, of doom and gloom, apocalyptic, catastrophic thinking versus naive optimism. We have the kind of, it's all catastrophe, or, oh, it's all going to be amazing because we can use technology or go to Mars. You can see that thinking that says, oh, that some miracle will save us. I think it's really important that we see what happens psychologically with this. So I'm going to do psychology for a minute. When humans struggle with something where we have multiple unknowns, what we often do is what's called splitting. And we split into either or thinking. It's either terrible or it's amazing. And we see those binaries play out in human nature in all our worlds, political worlds, dietary worlds. We call some foods good and some bad, right? We call some weather good and some weather bad. Ice cream doesn't know it's bad. Ice cream is ice cream, right? But we label it that way. Yeah, we project onto it. We create the good-bad split. As soon as we create the good-bad split, we put all sorts of things into that categorization. Flying is bad, not flying is good, or the other way around. And people go to war. Now, yours is a country that has had a civil war, as has the UK. Who wins in a civil war? The short answer is no one, really, right? You're at war with yourself, and there's no clear winner. When you're at war with yourself, what you're splitting, and you're projecting all of the bad onto some other group of people. And we see it in other splits in society, like racism. We say, this is good and that's bad. We divide and split and create an enemy out there so that we can feel okay over here. It's a way of avoiding the multiple uncertainties and existential terror that comes with the climate biodiversity crisis, where we've got multiple unknowns going on all at the same time. And there's some famous words about holding the tension, staying with the trouble, tolerating uncertainties. And that doesn't mean just kind of going, oh, I don't know. It doesn't mean being passive about this, but it does mean saying, we're not sure. And if we try and all sorts of positive things can come out of that uncertainty, so long as we do not divide the world up into catastrophe. Because if we hold that tension, moments of crisis give us moments of absolute transformational change. And I don't mean just papering over the cracks. Now, I know this is a sensitive subject area, so I don't want anyone to think that I'm using it naively or in a trivial way. But it is a brilliant illustration. So following the 9/11 terrorist Twin Towers attacks in the US, massive, not just country trauma, but global trauma. You can't ask people if anything has come out of that other than anything awful near the time. But researchers went in a couple of years later and said to people who were directly caught up, they said, has anything good come out of this? We're not dismissing all the awfulness and the terror and the loss, and has anything good come out of this as well? And people said, yeah. So this is about the transformational possibilities of trauma. People said, yes, I've left a job I hated because I realized that life is too short. They left relationships that were not working. They found a spiritual path or changed their career. They got closer to their loved ones. So out of adversity, positive traumatic growth can emerge. And that's the transformational possibilities that I would argue are coming out of, potentially out of the climate crisis, provided we take it seriously and learn from it and not just try and push it away, minimize it, fix it, or pretend that it's not going to change the whole world, because it has to change the whole world. And we were not doing so well, right? This is not losing a world that is perfect. I'm sorry. We had increasing mental health difficulties, particularly in global industrialized northern countries like the US, Europe, the UK. That was on the increase in young people and children. And there are multiple reasons for this. We can look at social media, look at mobile phone use. We can look at insecurity, anxiety, look at classroom sizes. But the climate crisis is part of that. And that was on the increase. So actually, we had to deal with that anyway for the mental health of our young people. So maybe this is going to, I don't want to be too Pollyanna-ish and positive, but I want to also, this is a kind of fierce argument here. We talk about radical hope. We talk about transformational hope, not naive hope. And radical hope says, well, we might be going off a cliff, but we can go down fighting. And we can fight for what's important.
So before COVID, I do some work in the veteran mental health space. And from that work, learned, to your point, the significant rise globally in mental health.
Yeah.
Then the world shuts down in March of 2020. COVID hits. Now we're on the other side of what I've been calling the mental health tsunami. Now you sprinkle on top of that climate change and climate anxiety. What are some of the common emotional, mental, and physical symptoms of eco-anxiety?
Well, we're talking about the ground shifting under your feet, and what you were able to trust and rely on before is no longer as reliable, which makes people anxious, insecure, and people can lose their minds. People can create fantasies about what the world is like and whose fault it is, because they're grasping for something to be safe and secure in a very changeable period of history. That means that people can grasp onto stuff that may not be wise or smart or reliable. And that's really, really important. I think that the argument about it being a tsunami is tricky because it's a bit more of a trickle effect than one big hit on this. And it's subtle and it's creeping up on us. And I think I'm boring because I'm going to come back to, we don't know how to deal with this. A young woman who I'm working with in the US said to me, and I've worked in mental health for over 40 years. So I thought I knew quite a bit. And then every so often when people are talking about the climate crisis, I hear something new. And I think, oh, I don't know this. In fact, I would go so far as to say, and I do apologize for this, if anybody tells you they're an expert in this stuff, don't listen to them, run away, don't believe them. And I have been working in this over 20 years, so I'm a bit of an expert, but I am constantly learning about it. This young woman said to me last year, she said, and I've got permission to use any of these quotes, she said, I wish I was mad. Now, I've never heard anyone wish they were mad in my whole life. She's bright, she's intelligent, she's in a secure relationship, just got married, loving family, loves her cat, works in sustainability. You'd look at this young woman and think, your mental health's great, right? But she's so overwhelmed with anxiety about climate change. She said to me, I wish I was mad. She said, because dealing with madness would be easier than dealing with climate anxiety. And I just thought, wow, you know, I need to understand what that's like. What's it like being you? What's it like to be scared to open your curtains in the morning? Because whatever the weather is like, that will dictate what your emotional state is like. I need to try and understand that just because I don't feel that, it doesn't mean that you're crazy that you feel that. So there are some people who are, you know, perhaps feeling this more strongly or more acutely on behalf of the rest of us. Particularly young people's defenses psychologically are not fully developed. Maybe they're more sensitive to the unfairness in the world, the injustice in the world. You know, maybe they've not learned that the world is unfair, and maybe some of us are a bit more immune to that. You know, when you work with veterans, you're talking about people who've gone through trauma, gone through stress, and they've often lost a lot of that sense of security in the world and trust in the world. You know, because they go out to fight, trusting the message they're given, and often it doesn't follow through. And they end up traumatized themselves, as well as seeing trauma in others, and then they're devastated. You know, they don't know how to deal with that. One thing that can come out of this could be a capacity to imagine what it's like for other people. Just because you've not gone through it, it doesn't mean that that person is crazy or wrong. Maybe they're feeling it on behalf of others. More and more people are having climate anxiety in their dreams. So just because you can push it away during daylight hours, it doesn't mean it's not going to sneak into your dreams. And often these dreams are things like trying to drive to be with their family and not being able to get to them, not being able to get fuel for the car, food running out. So fear about social collapse, system collapse, insecurity, anxiety about their loved ones, people, you know, having dreams that they won't be able to feed their children. This is all about survival, isn't it? And we're mammals, you know, fundamentally, we're humans. And we are born not able to survive too well unless people look after us. That first couple of years of our life, we're pretty vulnerable. You know, if you compare us to, you know, other mammals like cats and dogs and giraffes and elephants, they're up on their feet fairly quickly, right? We're not. We lie there and we need somebody to look after us. So we form attachment to our loved ones and hope that our loved ones will pick us up and look after us. That creates that attachment bond. That attachment bond isn't just from us to them, it's from them to us, you know? Infants can be hard work, so we have to love them, right? In order to take care of them. That attachment to people, to planet, is being threatened at the moment because the Earth is our home. And our home is insecure. Our home is making us feel unsafe. And we don't know what to do with that. Am I making sense to you?
Complete
or am
sense.
I just this
Nope.
British woman rambling away?
Not at all. Complete sense.
It's I hear these different ways people struggle to articulate the depth of that fear, the depth of that despair, and the hurt that they feel that other people don't understand. You know?
Maybe as a follow-up to that. Oh, sorry, please.
No, you go on.
No, I was going to say, how does the constant drumbeat of news about climate change contribute to eco-anxiety?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because on the one hand, we need information and we want to be informed. You don't want to just be looking the other way until, you know, because actually I'd rather be awake to it now then wake up. It's the people who are not awake to it now who are going to wake up in 5 years and go, why didn't you tell me? That's going to be a lot more shocking and traumatizing. I'd rather people woke up now in a more gradual way whilst there's still time to do something about it. So we need information. We need knowledge. We need to be informed. But we don't want it to be too much so that it completely overwhelms us. Now, what I'm going to do here is quote an 8-year-old. And I'm going to use her name because I'm in terrible trouble if I don't. So, Sophia, right? I asked her, when I started my direct research with young children, she was 8, I asked a lot of them, how do I talk to you about this without completely terrifying you? And I'm going to tell you what she said, because at the end of it, you're going to think, I kind of wish this child was running the world, really. So I said to her, how do I talk to you about this? And she went, well, she said, you've got to tell me the truth. She said, if you don't tell children the truth, you're lying to us. She said, and if you lie to us, we can't trust you. And if we can't trust you, we can't tell you how we feel. And if we can't tell you how we feel, we're on our own. She said, but don't tell me the bad news all at once. Tell me some bad news, then some good news. Then some bad news, then some good news. Then some bad news, then some good news. She said, anyway, she said, I'm not a baby, right? So we need the information, but we need to balance up the good news with the bad news. And we don't want to replace the bad news with the good news or the other way around. We need a both and approach to this because there is loss of life going on as we speak. People are losing their countries, their livelihoods. People are losing hope all over the world. It's a planetary crisis. The grief, the despair, we should be feeling this on behalf of those, even if you and I are not facing that immediate physical threat. We should be feeling it. That's our responsibility. That will also prompt us to act and do something about that rather than get overwhelmed and guilty and just hide away and bury our heads in the sand. So we need, how do we do that? We need emotional intelligence here, and we need resilience, emotional resilience. We need to recognize that, you know, famous people, Michael Jordan, the basketball player, you know, he's famous for saying, you know, I missed thousands of winning shots. He said, the only shot people remember is the winning shot. He said, but I wouldn't have got the winning shot without all the thousands of missed shots, right? A young activist asked me a few years ago, she said, how do you develop emotional resilience? I don't think she liked my answer. But I said, oh, you fail, you mess up, you get stuck, you fall over, you get up, you try again. And then you fail again. And then you get up, you try again. And then you fail. And you don't try and avoid the failure, you learn from it. And you go, right, what do I need to do differently? What can we do differently? Because that's the other crucial thing, is this is a collective problem. Of course, tackling the climate crisis is an individual responsibility, but it's national, it's international, it's collective, it's social, it's political, it's planetary. We have to deal with it on all those levels, all at the same time. Now, you don't have to be Superman or Superwoman. You can have a night off on the sofa eating pizza, but we do have to address it on all those levels all at the same time and not leave individuals feeling that they personally have got to save the world all by themselves, you know. Yeah, we need, okay, periodically, but not all the time. Those small acts are as valuable as the collective big acts. We need both. And we've often lost a sense of that collective responsibility because we build walls and we get split and we think it's them versus us. And frankly, that thinking is never going to help us resolve something that is a planetary crisis, because nobody's going to be okay if everybody's not okay. So it can push us towards that shift in thinking. Some people, we also have to differentiate between people who've got fairly mild climate anxiety, where you know, recycling is going to make you feel better. If you can afford it, getting an electric car, going to help. Yeah. I'm not being judgy about this. Anything you do or don't do, it's an individual choice. If you can make small incremental changes constantly, think about your diet, think about the choices you make as a family, make small changes. And that's going to reassure, to help you feel better. But a significant number of people have quite significant climate anxiety, where staying alive in the world can feel really scary, and they don't quite know how to do that. They can sometimes feel despair, isolated, suicidal at its more extreme end. Now, thankfully, that's fewer people, but we also, they're not crazy. They're just feeling it more intensely. So we need to not call them mad. They're just feeling the same stuff. It's all on a continuum, but more intensely. And they need to be supported and reassured in taking action that is reassuring, whilst lobbying and pushing for action elsewhere. There was another group of children. I love quoting children. They're just so smart. There was another group of children I was talking with. This was before COVID. And I said to them, what do you need from education to help you with the climate crisis? What do you want schools to do? I love their answer. They said, okay. They said, apologies to all geography teachers out there. They said, we don't need lessons in oxbow lakes. This is not helpful. What is going to prepare us for the world we're inheriting? They said, we need lessons in how to build boats, how to build houses, which crops to grow, how to grow healthy, you know, drought resilient plants, right? Without always using chemicals. They also said, we want, and I love this, they're asking for lessons in this. They see that as an educative process. They see that as giving them that resilience. They also said, we want lessons in how to have difficult conversations with our parents about this, because often our parents don't get it. So we want you to teach us on how to have those conversations, those difficult conversations. They also said, we want lessons in how to lobby politicians, right? I love these kids. They're looking at it from a personal, ecological level, from things you can do in your own backyard to things you can do in the education system, things you can do relationally, and things you can do politically. And they're recognizing that you're not all going to do all of this on the same Tuesday afternoon, but you can do all of them, just not all the same day. But any of those things can help, significantly help.
We have about 5 minutes left, and we've been talking for almost an hour about doom, gloom, extinction, anxiety, stress, and guilt. Let's end on a high note, if that's possible. Take us to the end of the show with advice or a story that helps our audience feel less stressed, more resilient, and become more empowered.
Okay. Can I be a bit annoying first?
You're my guest. Do whatever you like.
My ex used to call me his difficult English woman, which I took as a compliment, you see. So I'm going to give you an illustration of depth psychological understanding of this. And I'm going to use the story of Sleeping Beauty. And then I'm going to give you a few positives. In short, story of Sleeping Beauty, beautiful little baby, all the fairy godmothers turn up and give her gifts. You're going to have an amazing voice, beautiful hair, everyone will love you. But they have forgotten to invite the 13th fairy godmother, who swoops in and says, you're going to prick your finger and die, right? And everyone's really upset. And then the next fairy godmother, who's been forgotten, comes in and goes, no, you're not going to die, you're just going to go to sleep. Now, if you take that as a traditional narrative, that 13th fairy godmother is the bad one. But you could also argue that she saved that princess from a knife of narcissistic hell. Who wants to be that perfect? Perfect hair, perfect voice, everyone falling in love with you. Oh, save me, right? So we need that grit. We need that little shadowy stuff. Life is not that sweet. But we don't want it to be so doom and gloom and shadowy that it's unbearable. But equally, we don't want this living in the sunlight, because nothing will depress you more than trying to live in the sunlight all the time. Because what do you do with your natural depression? Humans naturally sometimes have moods. We get depressed, we get angry, we get irritated, we don't know how to get along with people. You know, I'm a couples therapist, and I spend half my life trying to teach people to have happy, healthy arguments, right? If you don't argue, then, you know, good luck, really. Tell me how you do it. So that's the shadow in life. And the shadow is not bad. The shadow brings gifts, which are not always comfortable, but they give us depth, meaning, wisdom, which will help us navigate this. So that's the depth psychology approach, which is don't call something doom and gloom. Let's look under the surface. Maybe there's a little bit of sneaky help here. On top of this, I'm going to give you another final story, which is two parents walking down the beach one day with their children, and there's been a big storm and lots of sea creatures thrown up on the beach, and some of them are dead, some of them are alive, and the children are throwing the live ones back in the water, and the parents are getting irritated because they're taking a long time over this. They want to get on, finish the war, be efficient, you know. And they say to the children, what's the point? There's hundreds of them. You can't save them. Just don't bother. Let's get going. And the children just picked up one that was alive and threw it back in the water and said, I made a difference to that one. Right? So just go out there and save that one starfish. It makes a difference to that one. We're in this together. If we don't take care of the trees, the creatures, the children, the grass, other countries, we're in a mess. So
Caroline
save
Hickman,
that one starfish.
I love closing on that. Save that one starfish.
Yeah.
That's going to be the title of our next show when we have you back.
I'd love to come back.
Brilliant. Caroline Hickman, thank you so much for being with us today. I really appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you. And I know it's late in the UK, so I really, really appreciate your time.
Well, we're good. Thank you.
And thank you to our audience, which now includes people in over 50 countries, for joining us for another episode of Next Steps Forward. I'm Chris Meek. For more details on upcoming shows and guests, please follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/Chris Meek Public Figure, and on X at Chris Meek_USA. We'll be back next Tuesday, same time, same place, with another leader from the world of business, politics, public policy, sports, or entertainment. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.